Hello and welcome to episode 207 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the penultimate week of the Call of Duty League's Major 1 qualifiers. And this, by far, was the craziest week in terms of results in recent memory, even dating back to last season. The amount of upsets that we saw this week was actually pretty incredible. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, pretty action-packed day in the NFL and in the CDL. Especially today, had some very interesting outcomes. But across this weekend, it was only 8 CDL matches, but basically all of them had some major talking points and stuff. So we can jump right in.
Yeah, so the first match was what we kind of expected, Miami versus Vancouver on Friday. Miami 3-0s the Surge, which is, maybe we didn't expect a 3-0 necessarily, just considering Miami had looked down. Vancouver won their first match of the season last week. But this is kind of what you would expect of these rosters coming into the season. And Miami takes care of business. They win 3-0. Any surprises or any kind of standout moments for you in the Heretics 3-0 win?
Yeah, I mean the standout moments. It was just all super in this series. He literally put the team on his back and basically all three maps, but especially in the map 3 control, he had a 1v3 in the overtime to seal the 3-0 sweep. He had another 1v3 to kick off the search, and he was shooting some bodies too, showing some love to the Surge boys. I can't remember. I think it was TJ or Gwen, one of them. Um, and in the map 1, I'm pretty sure he led the lobby with 24 kills, went 24 and 14. So really super. Just had a bit of a takeover series, and it was pretty. I'm not really sure how I would characterize it, but I mean a 1.4 is a 1.4, but it just looks a little weird because the numbers are lower just in terms of interactions because it was only a 3 game series, but it's still 1.4, still impressive showing out of him. And even shout out Trakes too. Trakes had 2 pretty good performances in the respawns. Metals had a 10 bomb in the search to go alongside the Super's 11. So pretty solid all around performance from the Heretics. I mean, when Rancor is able to just have his feet kicked up and dropping a .94 and still getting the win, that's got to feel good for him. After him having to do the opposite a couple times last year, putting the team on his back. So yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well before all that. Just heading into this series, especially after Vancouver getting that win to get them on the board last week, we weren't necessarily totally sure what to expect. I don't think I was expecting a 3-0 either. I definitely was expecting Miami to win this one, but I think this was um, a little bit more of what we can expect to see from Miami against teams that on paper or in theory are below them in the standings. They took care of business and got a big win for them in the standings. We've already noted enough times like how they started off the year and a little bit on the back foot because of visa stuff and all that. So important win to kick off an important week for them here.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of back you up on the Trakes front. I think this was probably his best series of the season to this point, which, is not saying a ton because this should be the team that you get your best series against. But, I don't think it should be taken for granted that he dropped a 1.2 in this series. Like you said, the Overload was definitely his best map. But he had pretty rough spots against some of the top teams, Toronto and OpTic, to start the year, which are, again, 2 of the 4 or 5 best teams. I guess we'll get to that in a little bit. But he's looked better over the past few matches, but this was certainly his best performance, and this was Miami's best performance in terms of the dominance and just a decisive win, because before this they went to 3 Game 5s. The first 3 matches of the season were Game 5s. They won against C9, lost to OpTic and Toronto, and then they beat Carolina, or they lost to Carolina 3-1. So certainly just a standout performance from Super, but that's something that we've come to expect of him over the last year. But for Trakes, I think it was pretty big. I'm sure just from a confidence perspective, to have a big series and not to struggle and kind of be looked at as kind of the low point on your team. So big win for Miami, kind of what you expect from Vancouver after a one-win week last week. And then the next match of the weekend started this run of upsets involving some of the top teams in the CDL. We had the Riyadh Falcons versus the Paris Gentlemates. We both picked Paris, as we have, I think, picked Paris pretty much in every match so far this season. And the first map looked exactly like what we expect of one of the best teams in the league, 250 to 55 on exposure hardpoint. It was just Neptune just absolutely destroyed everybody. I saw people kind of gassing up the Neptune Ghosty duo after this map, and then it kind of fell apart from there because the Falcons win S&D, they win Overload in a very controversial fashion that people were very much not happy about, and then they win a thriller Blackheart hardpoint 250 to 231 and take this series, which I don't know, even with the Falcons roster, with the way that Paris has played this year, even with that FaZe loss, I don't know if anybody really could have predicted this kind of result. What does this say about both of these teams? Obviously, the Falcons were, they have this incredible and very talented roster, but they looked very shaky to start the season. Paris, the complete opposite. They looked very dominant to start the season. Is there any kind of change of opinion on your side about either of these teams now?
I don't know necessarily about a change in opinion. I definitely, there's a lot to break down with the series. I'll try to be as concise as possible, but I think in generalities or just overall, the big talking point I've brought up in the past with the Falcons in particular was just like breaking down their schedule as playing those top teams early on, not finding success playing those middle of the pack or lower teams after that, and finding success. This was going to be their first real test again against a quote unquote top team, and they showed up. And Gentlemates, on the other hand, again, talking in generalities here, this is 2 matches in a row now where they just didn't look like that dominant Gentlemates team that we saw at the start of the year. And don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but people are saying that with OpTic too, in the sense of like, these are 2 teams that started out really hot, and since the holiday break, they just haven't been the same. And I'm not going to, throw any excuses out for them and say like they got complacent or anything like that, because I don't know what the case is, but it's just observationally speaking, like they are 2 teams that started out very strong, and since the break, they just haven't looked the same, and it's got people thinking and got people talking. So, this one in particular, though, was strange because, like you said, with that first, the near 200-point victory in Map 1, I was getting ready for this to just be a 3-0 slammage, and it wasn't even that. They went up 4-2 in the Search and Destroy, and in that would be the 7th round, I believe. Sib was literally going for, like, World Star Trick Star. I can't even speak right now. World Star Trick Scope
Trick shot,
snipe,
quick scope.
Yeah, I'm struggling, but like he was like doing a wall bounce on mid zig and raid into kitchen and like trying to hit these snipes, and then he was like chowing, like sliding across kitchen front door for a no scope, and it was kind of just like I honestly think from the outside looking in, it felt like at that point in that round when they were up in the S&D, they or Sib or any, like they were just feeling very confident and thought they could do no wrong, and Falcons just took advantage and won 4 straight rounds in the S&D to tie up the series. And after that, I mean, it wasn't all Falcons because it was very close maps, but the big talking point with this was in that overload, the map 3. They being Falcons, successfully just held on to the overload device for nearly 2 minutes. According to the broadcast, they said 1 minute and 54 seconds. They just basically played keep away and held it in their base, and Gentlemates kept trying to push them, and they couldn't break the setup, and that's apparently something that Falcons have been working on. And People were critical of that, saying it was kind of, not big fans. I saw some people saying like Cheese and Clay was playing into it, like uh, joking about the cheese and stuff. Obviously, Clay's a Packers fan, so I think he did a tweet something like that. But it's the way things work right now with overload. It's I don't want to say it's an exploit or anything like that, but more or less Falcons taking advantage of an opportunity that they even said, I believe the post match interview was Kismet. They said it's something they've practiced and they've worked on, and they were able to pull it off to perfection, and Gentlemates didn't have an answer for it. So it wasn't the most exciting gameplay to see, especially for that new mode, which is something that is still being talked about in the community about how people feel about it, and in terms of being like a permanent fixture in the CDL going forward, all that yada yada. This was definitely, if there's like a meeting or something where you're trying to vote on whether Overload stays for next year or not, this isn't going to be like the poster child gameplay that's showcased for it. It would probably, unless some of the rules change or something like that, it's probably a case for Overload to not be in the next game, but that's a topic for much later in the year. But nonetheless, you can't fault Falcons for playing the ball the way it lies, and they just showcased one way to win Overload that nobody's really seen yet. Even if it has been worked on by Falcons in practice and stuff, we just haven't seen this in the CDL to date. So it was definitely interesting, and it will be interesting to see if other teams start to work on this, and then that would lead to more discussions about Overload. I feel like 'cause if we see this more frequently, then people will most likely get bored of Overload and this specific style of play, and it could lead to some changes, or maybe like you can't hold the ball without scoring it for X amount of time, or something like that. I don't know, yada yada. But enough about that. The final map was really just a back and forth. It was the second or third time we've seen Blackheart now in the CDL since its return, and we saw it a couple times this weekend. It's really just like a straight up bang out map. Like it is massive interactions, and you are getting a ton of action. And some people seemingly aren't huge fans of it because it is a smaller map, and it feels like a lot of people are just trying. It's a little reminiscent of some of the IW maps, Infinite Warfare, where it was like people just four hit the front of hills, or four hit one way, and it's just 4v4, like head smashing into the hard points and stuff. So it was high octane and very interesting. A lot of interactions the times that I watched it this weekend. But from a player's perspective, maybe it's a little different, and not people's most preferred style. But I think it's still, we haven't seen it that much in the CDL yet because it was on that hiatus at the start of the year. So I'm interested to see how it plays out as the season progresses and as people get more reps on it. But for this map, it was back and forth, really. Lots of kills going each way. Neptune, I put down he had at least three pieces. It could have been more. Like he was lighting the world on fire. And then Xnid went on a 10 spree to close out the map and finish 34 and 25. Him and Pred both had 34. Envoy had 32 and Neptune had 31 for Gentlemate. So that's three guys combining for 120 kills, 120 plus kills. And Falcons won that one 250 to 231. It was just an absolute banger of a map, and it came down to the wire, but Falcons got the job done in the end. And like I said, definitely you watch that first map of this series, especially it's a near 200-point win, map one, and then a 19-point win the other way in the map four. Definitely a bit of change of pace there. But yeah, I think just full circle here, it was good for the Falcons and Falcons fans to see them perform against a quote-unquote top team. And for Paris and the Gentlemates fans, it's a bit of a head scratcher, just in terms of, like I said, two matches in a row now that you kind of most likely expected Gentlemates to come in and take care of business, and it wasn't just that same clean dominance we saw from them early on.
Yeah, it was definitely a winnable series for Paris, even after they blew the S&D, because the overload, like you said, it was a really close map. I don't know, like with the we'll talk a little bit more about the strategy because I think the reaction to it is pretty overblown, just considering the strategies that we've seen in a lot of the third game modes throughout COD history. And then the Blackheart, like you said, like I mean, they have a chance. They only lost by 19. This is a very winnable map for them. It's a very fast paced, like, head to head map that they should be able to beat Falcons. That's kind of the thing with, letting a map go like that raid S&D, whether Sib was taking it seriously or they, not or whatever, that is up to them. And, those probably say that, no, we're definitely taking it seriously. But like, I mean, don't underestimate a team like Falcons. I could understand a little bit if this was the Falcons at the beginning of last season, where it's like guys that definitely should not be in the CDL. Like you have like former world champions on this Falcons roster, and they have beaten pretty much all of the bottom tier teams at this point in the year. So no matter how well they played against LAT or OpTic to start the season, they definitely deserve your respect, and you should not be underestimating them, especially when you're only up 4-2. It's not like you're up 5-0 and you've just absolutely wiped them out. Like they are good enough to have taken 2 rounds off of you at that point. But I do want to talk about the overload because I just don't. I get why people say they don't like it, and I completely understand that. My thing is, this is very, very little difference than what we saw with Capture the Flag. Like CTF, if a team was up by 1 point and there was a minute or 2 left, they're holding the flag forever. Like they're just not going to let it. They're going to make sure that it doesn't get returned. They're going to make sure that they can waste as much time. So I don't really see a big difference in this than CTF, which obviously that was kind of a reason why CTF lost a lot of favor in the COD community was, tight games just turn into like, let's just run out the clock. It's basically basketball without a shot clock, which, just is kind of a horrible experience as someone who covers high school basketball in a state without a shot clock. The last few minutes of a tight game can turn into a team passing the ball around for 3 minutes. And, it doesn't seem like basketball at that point. So I do get the gripes about overload, but I want to kind of posit Marky B's potential rule changes, his suggestions for rule changes that he said would instantly make overload better. He added Daniel Say on Twitter. He said 3-minute halves, but when the ball is in possession, the clock stops. He said this directly addresses camping with the ball like in Falcons versus Gentlemates, as the clock would be stopped. Another one is when you cap 4 points in the first half, the other team should only have the same amount of time to cap like uplink. He said good side is an advantage on second half currently. And then he said overtime should just be CTF stopwatch rules, which basically means that whoever, you cap it in a minute, you have to do it in a minute or less on the other side. So, or the other team has to do it a minute or less. I think all of those changes are good. I don't see a real downside to them, or at least trying them out. Obviously, this would probably have to come in at some point. I mean, this will never be added. So we should just probably put it out there. I very much don't think that there are going to be changes to this. I just don't believe the CDL is very flexible with some of these things, especially because that's just how the CDL kind of works with this, or maybe it'll just take a really long time. But I think that starting with the Major 2 qualifiers, these rules should come in to just see if it actually makes a difference. There are a lot of online matches, as we have said multiple times. Each team plays 11 online qualifiers in Major 2. That gives you a ton of data points, basically, to pull from that the CDL can look from those. I don't even know what the math is on that, but with all 12 teams playing 11 matches, some of them against each other, that's dozens of matches, more online matches than you would get in any other major qualifier. And that just gives you a lot of data to kind of look at and see, does this actually make a difference? Has it made a more entertaining product? Does it make it more competitive for the players? I would like to get your thoughts on this, though. What do you think of these prospective rule changes that Marky B is suggesting?
Yeah, I definitely think that this is something that would most likely be tested in ranked play first. Like we kind of saw that last year a little bit. Obviously this year with rank play not out yet, that's a little bit harder. So I'm not sure if that's something that the devs or CDL would be able to work on. But the one thing about Overload, again, I haven't played it from a competitive perspective at all, and I barely even played it in pubs, to be honest. But um, the one thing that like the random number of 8, just like be like 8 is just the max number of caps you can have in a game, and that just feels like a random number. And it's like at 4 caps and a half, the game is over if it's in the first half. I don't know if I agree with the time element of it, like because it's not like it's a race to uh 4 caps in that in the first half. You know what I mean? So like if for Marky B's second rule there, like your team scores 4 caps in 2 minutes, then I'm playing in the second half, and I score 4 points in less time. That just means I win, but that you're also trying to cap the flag in that, or cap the score the ball in that round. So if that would mean if you just score once in the second half, the game's just over. So definitely some weird things they'd have to work out there, but I think the like the golden goal or whatever, that system for overtime is better than this. Like it's basically just like a round 11 S&D for OT at this point right now, and we saw it a little bit in the Heretics Surge match in where Super got the 1v3, but like both teams like kind of just didn't move for like a minute. They were like they didn't want to make that first mistake and put their team in a man disadvantage, and that was kind of more TDM-esque. So I think a golden goal, like stopwatch style thing for OT, I'm definitely a fan of. I think that would be more interesting than playing like for lifes or something like that, and it would emphasize the objective a little bit more. So yeah, I think he's got some solid points there, and I think that's part of the thing with a new mode just being thrown into the fire here, is that we haven't seen it in the past. Don't have. I'm sure if we went back to Black Ops 2, the very beginning, there were probably some things
Hardpoint
with Hardpoint. I mean, Hardpoint started like mathematically
impossible.
being when there was still like a minute on the clock or a minute plus if you're getting blown out enough.
The casters would be doing math in real time to figure out if the game was over.
Yeah. So there's definitely been some stuff over the years with new modes that gets ironed out with time. I mean, look at Hardpoint now. You can't even, for a lot of people, it's hard to even fathom what competitive COD would look like without Hardpoint. So I think Overload just needs some time, and these are some decent suggestions. Whether they fall on deaf ears or not, that's a topic for another day.
Yeah, he said in the comments that maybe 2-minute halves would be better than 3. I think just in general, his ideas to promote aggression in these maps and for people not to be able to camp, like we've seen in Hardpoint, it is in Black Ops 2, because the clock didn't stop when you were in the point. You would get to the point where it's 202 to 101, and it's like, yeah, this team has no chance, and that takes a lot off of the final minute or two that you're playing the map, and stuff like this. And we saw it with CTF, and CTF was great at some point in competitive Call of Duty, but for many of the final years it was in the competitive slate, it just wasn't really competitive because you had these camping strategies, which are 100% valid. And we see it in traditional sports all the time, that there are strategies that are smart and clever, but they don't make for a good product. I mean, you're a huge baseball fan. The shift it's ingenious because it's basically like, how much did you scout? Where does this guy hit all the time? And we're going to move our defense to defend against that. That makes a ton of sense. At the same time, Major League Baseball is like, this fucking sucks. This is not very fun to watch. We like to see our guys get hits. And so they banned it, or they banned part of it. You can shift a little bit, but you can't move a guy to the other side of second base, stuff like that. And some people cry about that and say like that's against like the spirit of the game. But that's also not what Major League Baseball is about. Major League Baseball is about getting people to watch their product, and the same thing with the pitch clock. They want
Yep.
people to not be scratching their balls for 45 seconds every pitch. And I mean, it makes sense, even if it isn't like a traditional way of thinking. And obviously, like, overload of first year game mode does not have that kind of cachet or tradition. So you can change all of these things. Like, it doesn't really matter in the end because it's not S&D, which I still think, and I've said this for many years, I think S&D should be win by 2 instead of win by 1. It does take
Yeah.
the edge off of round 11s, but it also takes the randomness of, like, oh, you got one more kill over the first 10 rounds, therefore you get the preferred side most of the time. I just think that's kind of a stupid rule. It makes sense for you to have to win both offense and defense. It shows that you are a better S&D team in general. It would increase the skill gap, as people like to say, but just be more competitive, and better teams would generally even more often win S&Ds as a result. I think some of these rule changes should at least be tested. Like you said, if it's in ranked play first and then it makes its way up the CDL, I just don't want to get into a position where we've had half of the season or 3/4 of the season gone and we've been playing with kind of these lesser tier, less effective, less entertaining overload rules. And then people just kind of write off this game mode wholesale, and they get to a point where they're like, just bring control back, bring CTF back, give us gridlock or whatever, like these other, what was it? Grid Iron was the World War II
Yeah.
game mode, or some kind of uplink variant, like, which is kind of what we're. But like, I don't think that there's a perfect solution, as is the case with a lot of these competitive COD rules and game modes. But change is needed, even if I don't think the outrage is necessarily like that warranted. I think there are a lot more, there are other things to be more outraged about, but I do get why people are not pleased to watch nothing happen other than like waves of kills in a base for 2 minutes straight at the end of a match. So I understand that, but I'm interested to see what actually happens with this, if anything, in terms of the changes that come to Overload as a result of this map in particular. And then let's just keep moving on. Saturday, January 17th, we had Miami versus Boston. A very entertaining series. We split our predictions here. So we were in lockstep in those first two matches. You went with Miami in the series. I went with Boston. The first map is just one of the best, one of the best maps that we've seen this season. Miami ends up winning it 250, 248. They come back to win map 1. Then Boston wins map 2. Nasty has an incredible map, Scar S&D. Miami wins map 3 in Overload, and then they win the fourth map as well. The Cami Purge duo did not have a great fourth map. 28 and 60 combined between the two. But you predicted this. What did you think of Miami's win here? And obviously, because they won on Friday as well, a 2-0 week from the Heretics.
Yeah, it was a very essential 2-0 week for them. Again,
Yeah.
talking about the slow start, the visa issues, all that, yada, yada. They had 2 winnable matches on paper, in my eyes and in other people's eyes, and they came out and got the job done in both. Definitely, that first map was a bit of a toss from Boston, and that could have changed the series, especially considering Boston won the S&D. If they're up 2-0, maybe that switches things up, but also that, it's the Boston team that got reverse swept by Vancouver, so you can't really say that. But it was a really, I think even there were a couple Scar hard points this weekend across series, even in the OpTic LA Thieves match to end the weekend, where it wasn't quite a comeback like this, but it was like, it felt like from a viewer perspective, not a ton was happening on the map, but the losing team was just like slowly clawing their way back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's just the way that map plays or something, but that's how it felt like to me. I felt like it was obvious in this map in particular, but even in other ones where it wasn't like as close to a comeback, it felt like the door, even when teams were up 70, 80 points, like it felt like the door was never shut, and that losing team still had a chance, even if it felt like nothing was going on the map. And maybe it's not the biggest map, but it's not the smallest map. There are some hard points that are close, and people just flying in, contesting and stuff like that. Maybe that plays a factor too. Um, but it's also, early on. Maybe some people, are still trying to get a feel for the map and how it plays and whatnot. But that's just my viewer perspective of it. I could be completely wrong on it, but that's how it felt to me watching it. Was that it feels like this is a map. There's other maps historically in COD where you get a 100-point lead or something like that. Like it's done and dusted. Like as long as that team rotates to the next hill and takes care of business, like there's just no way you're coming back with some of the rotations. But on this map, it felt like multiple times this weekend I was watching Scar hardpoints where it was never done regardless of what the score was. And this was a good example of that just because Miami actually did pull off a pretty impressive comeback. But even in a losing effort, Nasty put on a show in this match and in Boston's other match, which we'll get to in a bit. You noted Cammy notably struggled in the last two maps. We'll get to him in a little bit as well, but for this match in particular, it was pretty big underperformance, especially in that map 4 from Cammy and Purge, and that was one of the things I highlighted with this Boston team. I feel like it's been pretty apparent over the last 2+ years that Boston's building around Snoopy. They add in Nasty, and Nasty has just been super solid, super consistent so far this year. And my New Year's resolution or whatever was the question of is Cammy and Purge the guys that Boston wants to keep on the squad to try to enable Snoopy to hit that next level or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an example here of a case where they put up a couple stinkers and it wasn't gonna get the job done. But Snoopy, I think I saw a tweet from a FaZe account that before this, Snoopy and Simp were the only players who had a positive KD in every series so far this year, which, not a ton of series. But this was a case here too. Snoopy had a .89. So, overall, just a strong performance out of Miami. So all 4 players on the team had positive KD. Trakes had the lowest KD at a 1.15, but had the most kills with 93. And Super had the highest KD with a 1.26, but the lowest number of kills at 83. So at 83 to 93 kill range for everyone on Miami, while Nasty had the most kills at 84. Only player positive on Boston with a 1.09. So Nasty was doing his thing, but other than that, yeah, I mean, maybe it goes differently for Boston if they close out that map 1. But like I said, we did just see them get reverse sweep, so you can't even, count on that. But, Miami was able to capitalize on a comeback there in map 1, win through the respawns, and secure a much-needed 2-0 week for them.
Yeah, they definitely they were guaranteed to be in the losers bracket to start Major 1 just based on the other results had they lost either of these matches against Vancouver or Boston this week, because they came in, they were 1-3. Their only win was against C9 to this point, and then they had lost a few game 5s to OpTic and to Toronto, so they needed both of these wins and they got them. And that's huge. They're still not guaranteed a spot in the winners bracket because of that poor start. They're going to have to win or have something else happen next week. They have a really tough match next week, which is not ideal for trying to get into the winners bracket, but at least they gave themselves a shot going into that final week. Boston also has a shot. We'll talk about their second match shortly here, but it would have been preferred certainly to win both of these matches, which I think both of them were very winnable, at least compared to, and obviously they, in hindsight, definitely should have beat Vancouver last week as well. And so they're in a weird spot, but I think both of these teams have something to be optimistic about. It's just different, for Boston, it's definitely Nasty and Snoopy are their bright spots. And it's just can we get Cammy and Purge or one of them to just step up for a map and then the other steps up for another map? Can they both, when they're both performing well, this team is really hard to beat at times. It's just that is not a very consistent thing for them. And it turns out something like this where they go 28-60 in map 4 and they only lose by 74. So this wasn't a 100-point club, but considering those stat lines, you definitely would think that they got absolutely just demolished and rolled off the map. Very interested final week. We will obviously talk about more about Boston in just a few minutes. Next up, we have Toronto versus Carolina. This continued this trend of, I would consider an upset. Obviously, Carolina is different. I don't know how to say it. Like, Exceed is in the running at this point. If this continues, he's in the running for most valuable player because this is the Neptune effect. Hey, like, they just beat one of the top 4 teams in the league 3-1. So they beat Carolina beats Toronto 3-1 in this series. They lose the opening hard point, as has been kind of a tradition for this week. And then they win a round 11 S&D, 3-1 overload, and then 250 to 152 Blackheart hard point. And this kind of changes everything for Carolina. This was a team that, at least through the first few weeks, kind of looked dead in the water to an extent. They lost to Boston in the opener. They got swept by the Falcons, who had gone 0-2 in the first week. Then they make this roster change during the break or later in the break. Since then, they have beaten Miami 3-1, Minnesota 3-2, and now Toronto 3-1. That is just incredibly impressive. That puts them in a position to get into the winner's bracket, which I did not think was really going to be in the cards, considering how poorly they started and the schedule that they had the rest of the way. How much of this is Carolina overperforming according to expectations? Was this a letdown for Toronto? What was kind of your read on this series?
I think it's fair to say it's a little bit of both, but I mean, hats off to Carolina, 3-0 now since the roster change. We'll get to it a little bit, but Scump and Methods did like an updated power rankings at the end of the matches this week, and they put Carolina in their top 3 now, just based on instant reaction to how they've been playing since Exceed came into the picture. And that's just, it wasn't something I had on my radar. I was not expecting Carolina to, I didn't think this was the roster change that was going to catapult them into contender status, but seemingly, they got to be on the radar. And I think this upcoming week will really be the true test for Carolina, because they are playing OpTic and LAT to round out these qualifiers. So I think the talk around Carolina will have a much larger sample size of them against the quote-unquote top teams before the major starts. And based on their performance in next week's matches, we will have a very good idea of where they potentially rank in like contender versus pretender sort of deal heading into the major. But for this match in particular, this felt really similar to the Falcons Gentlemates match for me. Like map 1, pretty much all Toronto. Joe Deceives literally just like 30 bomb in 2.5 minutes of hill time, just a ridiculous MVP style performance. That's what I was laughing at, by the way, when you said, in my head, when you were talking about Exceed, I was thinking like comeback player of the year, and then you dropped the MVP, and I'm like, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but that's not where my head was at, so it caught me a little off guard. But after the map 1 for Toronto, it's a close S&D, comes down to a 6-5, shout out Craze. Started off the round with the map with a 1v3 in round 1, en route to dropping 16 kills, which is now the new S&D record. It was Envoy and somebody else no, I don't remember who. Was it Mamba? I'm not remember. There 2 people dropped 4. No, I think it was Joe actually. 2 people dropped 14 last week, I know, and that was the record. And so now 16 is the record for Black Ops 7 S&D in the CDL. And it's crazed for a rookie, so that's cool to see. And they literally, the round 11 strat, I think I Hold Shift was the one commentating, and he said from the time the first bullet was shot in round 11 to the time the last person was alive was like 5.4 seconds or something like that. It was just like they hit out mid and they fried everybody quickly. It was absolutely insane round 11 call, like just not something I would expect from a team like Carolina that has like, it's got the rookies, but it also like the quote unquote vets aren't like, true vets. Like, Nero and Exceed have been around a while, but I don't consider them like vets. This is the Mac thing that I've said for a while when people started calling Mac a vet, and I was like, I'm not there with Mac yet, but That's more of a me thing than anything. But yeah, I mean, that's something. I mean, especially Carolina has Slasher in the roster. Like Slasher's going to be like, okay, everyone chill out, hold your lanes, and we're going to work a pick. And that's most likely what Slasher would have called. But then we get this new Carolina team. They're ready to chow, and they're just running at the other team. And I think maybe that's like a really good example breaking down like the stylistic difference since the roster change and potentially why Carolina has seen so much success. And you got to shout out Joe. Joe dropped 12 kills for the loss in the SND2. But then we go to map 3-1 for Carolina with Nero and Exceed. The SMGs turned ARs, both dropping 30. Joe drops 33 again for the loss. And then Blackheart Hardpoint, almost 100-point win for Carolina, where Joe drops 30 for the loss. So pretty strong performance out of Joe, all things considered. But yeah, for Carolina, I think the only thing to say right now is they're looking legit since the roster change, and you can't really question that at this point because they're undefeated. But like I said before talking about them, next week is a really big test for them, and I'm excited to see how they perform against those teams.
I just love this idea that really Exceed put into the world that a player like Slasher can hold a team back because he's not young enough, hip enough, up on the or flexible enough is probably the best word to put it, to allow the players that aren't like him or didn't come up with him to play the way that they want to play. Whereas Exceed, at least in these matches, he fits perfectly with the team. And that's a weird thing to say because Exceed has never been like the 2 times he's been in the CDL. And it's been like 5 or 6 years since he debuted in the CDL. So this wasn't like a short period of time, but he was never a guy that was like, he's just undeniable. Like his talent is otherworldly or his impact on the team is incredible. There's a reason that he hasn't been on a CDL team for most of his pro career. And yet we see here that with this roster at this time, it's kind of a perfect match for everybody's talents. Maybe it all falls apart. We've seen that with teams all the time. Maybe this is a honeymoon period and things are just clicking for this month and then they just can't get it to work at a later point. But right now, to beat Toronto, even if you say Toronto didn't have their best series or certain players on Toronto didn't have their best series, Toronto is undeniably a top 5 team in the CDL, and that kind of seems disingenuous because there are only 12 teams, but there's a pretty solid top 5, or what we thought was the top 5, where those teams are like legit world championship contenders, and they just beat them. Like, this wasn't a fluky win by any stretch of the imagination. They just beat them, and that's why I say Exceed for MVP. I don't know if he's the front runner necessarily, but like if this continues where they're able to be kind of like a top 5 or 6 team, that's kind of crazy, especially considering, I've always said it, when you get a chance to see the impact of one player versus another, that changes my opinion on MVP. That's why I pushed for Neptune to be considered for MVP last year, because we saw what Vancouver was before Neptune and then what they were after Neptune. And that gives you a very clear sense of the impact of an individual player, especially when it's a one-person change like it was with Neptune, with Vancouver, and now with Exceed in Carolina. Not saying that Exceed's going to win MVP. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that through the first 4 weeks of the CDL season, there are very few cases that I can make that are stronger than Exceed's right now in terms of his impact and what we saw with Carolina, from Carolina with Slasher, and now with Exceed. So, obviously there's a lot of season left to play. There's really, like you said, there's a lot of Major 1 qualifiers left to play, and they're going to have a huge step up in competition. Or I shouldn't even say that because Toronto is a big step up, but like a continued step up there, where they're going to be playing against ostensibly two of the top 5 teams again. And if they win both of those matches or even one of those matches, we're having some real weird conversations about Exceed for the foreseeable future, just as we did with Neptune last year. Next up, though, we had FaZe versus C9. That one was the most dominant DoorDash series of the weekend. In a weekend of a lot of upsets, even including FaZe, this was just so dominant.
Yeah, I was gonna say we might as well loop in FaZe's second match here because
Yeah,
I
let's do
don't
it.
think there's much to talk about for the FaZe C9 match. Just to for housekeeping's sake, FaZe won 3-0, 250 to 128 exposure hardpoint map 1. 04 dropped 40 bomb SMG duo Simp, dropped 32, so 72 out of the SMGs, and or they were Chance and Miles were broadcasting this. I think Chance called them the twin terrors now instead of the tiny terrors because like people call 04 twin or Bose started that, I think, because Bose and 04 look alike a little bit. And then Colossus S&D Draza dropping chopsticks 11-3 for a 6-2 victory. Exposure Overload 8-1. I think Paris had an 8-point gain at some point during these qualifiers, but if they didn't, this was like one of the first 8-point wins, or if not one of the first couple this year. And Abuza with a 2 KD, 30 and 14. Just absolute dominance out of FaZe, which makes this next match that happened today against G2 even more confusing. Going into that Cloud9 match, we talked about it being like FaZe's easiest match because they had such a daunting strength of schedule early on against all the other quote-unquote top teams. Then they go in today against a G2 team, which, during the preseason, some people had placed higher than other people originally anticipated, but they weren't, necessarily in the top half of rankings. They were probably around that 6 to 8 spot at highest in many people's eyes. And they quite frankly just like stole a win here, and it's one of those wins for G2 that it might not even change much for them because they might most likely are still looking at a loser's bracket spot unless some stuff goes their way with tiebreakers and whatnot. But it's really just one of those that's a bit more of a head scratcher than anything else. Like I'm just confused how FaZe even let this happen. But it's another example, again, mirrors the Gentlemates loss and Toronto loss that we've talked about, where FaZe, the team you expect to win, wins map 1, and then the other team comes out and wins the next 3, and it's not like blowouts. It was another round 11 in the search, 2-1 in the overload, and then a 50-point game in Colossus hardpoint map 4. Abuza most notably played pretty well throughout the entire series, including a sniper ace and dropped 13 kills in the S&D. Simp uncharacteristically dropped a breadstick in map 1. I'm pretty confident in saying you could probably go back over the years, and this would you could probably count on both hands the number of times that Simp has dropped a donut or a breadstick in S&D over the years. So pretty uncharacteristic performance out of him, but I'm not gonna put the blame on him for the whole series here and just that one map. It's I guess it happens. Just I don't think it's happened that much with Simp over the years. The only things that were really going through my mind after this series concluded, it felt like to me that this may have been a case where FaZe were potentially testing out some maps that they haven't played, and this was more of like a feel thing for me than like an actual like looking at the maps they've played so far this year. And obviously Blackheart could be a part of that just because it wasn't a part of the rotation early on. But this is something historically FaZe have been one of the teams when they've had these online matches later in the season. They have been one of the teams that's more willing to test some of the maps in the map pool more than other teams, whereas other teams would just continue to play their best maps. FaZe have always historically been more willing to try some of the different maps. I just feel like this would be very early for that to be the case here. But like I also said, they've played already the top teams and they seemingly are locked into a winner's bracket spot. So maybe that's just something, again, not sure if this is true. That's just something that popped into my head when I was watching and seeing the maps unfold. And the biggest thing that had me thinking this was like literally they're playing Colossus map 4 against G2, which is a map that Kremp dropped 54 kills on, and people are calling it Kremp Losses. So it's obviously, whether it's a meme or serious, it's at least like noteworthy enough to the point where like people in the community are talking about it being a good map for G2. If FaZe were, again, don't know how the vetoes are go, and I trust FaZe's coaching staff, but it feels like that would have been one maybe they veto unless they were just like more willing to just straight up chow G2 on it and be like, yeah, we want to get this rep on this and see if we can hang with a team that's, early on looking like they're pretty strong at this individual map. Outside of that was the big thing that really got me thinking about this. The only other thing that this result in particular got me thinking of, and I guess maybe in conjunction with some of these other matches we talked about, like Paris versus Falcons and Carolina versus Toronto, is maybe Black Ops 7 is going to be one of those years. We talked about it historically with Vanguard, where it felt like a lot of stuff for some teams was very coin flippy, and it was most likely, or most frequently, we talked about it with, it would have been Seattle Surge at the time, Pred, Sib, Mac, and Accuracy. We always talked about like you got to flip a coin on the day before they play, and depending on how it lands, they're either going to light the world on fire or you just didn't know what version of that team you were going to get on a given day. And I feel like that we haven't really talked about that being the case with a game since Vanguard a ton, but maybe again this is very gut reaction to just what happened this weekend for some of these notable teams and their results. But from a small sample size we've had in Black Ops 7, it's got me thinking that might be the case this year. We'll have to see how the year plays out. This could just be a bit of an anomaly weekend, and it led to some funky results. And then, I mean, if the top teams perform on land, then this week, it'll just be a thing of the past. But yeah, I went on a bit of a rant there, but as you can see, the difference in the two FaZe matches this weekend, one was an absolute stomp that we didn't have much we needed to say, and the second one really got my head spinning and had me thinking a whole ton of things. So I'd love to hear what you have to say on FaZe this weekend.
I think, honestly, this series might be more about Minnesota than it is about FaZe, in just the sense that we have understandably underrated what Minnesota is so far this season. They come into this map or match and they're 1-4 on the year. So there's no reason a 1-4 team versus a 4-1 team and the assumed number one seed at Major 1, considering what they had just gone through. We obviously pick FaZe, and we don't think that Minnesota has too much of a shot. Minnesota, they win this series, but they kind of won this series a lot of the ways that they have lost many of their series so far this season. Like, we should remind people that Minnesota, in their first 5 series of this year, had gone to 4 Game 5s, and they had lost 3 of them. So, and this was a very coin flip series as well. Raid S&D goes to round 11. It's a coin flip who wins round 11. Den Overload goes to overtime. It's a 1-point game. Those change the series, obviously. Like, if FaZe wins both of those maps, it's a 3-0 sweep. We talk about, we would be sitting here being like, that was a really close series. It didn't show how close it was considering it was a sweep, but that's kind of the nature of this G2 team. And even what we saw from Minnesota last year is they went to a ton of Game 5s. They lost more than they won, and it really killed them at the end of the season. To this point in the year, it has killed them again because they were 1-4 coming in, and they have very little shot to even make it to the winners bracket after beating FaZe, which just feels like ridiculous. If you had told us that Minnesota at some point in the qualifiers is going to beat FaZe, you would think that they're at least in competition or contention for the winners bracket. And, technically they have a shot, I think, still, but very, very little of a chance, especially because they're not going to be favored in next week's match when they play Toronto. So, like, with Minnesota, I really just think it's more about them for this match in particular, not to take anything away from, the performance of FaZe or to kind of give them a pass on this because they don't deserve it. Like, when you're a top team, you should be able to beat G2 Minnesota. I really believe that. We obviously saw that OpTic beat them early in the season before the break. So before OpTic, I guess, fell apart. We'll talk about it, but it does seem like there was just a kind of a, we didn't account for Minnesota being as good as they are, even with that start or the preseason that we saw from them. They just had a really tough start to the season where they just lost these game fives, and we kind of just thought, okay, like they're just not as good as we thought. And also we should take into consideration that last week when they lost 3-2 both times, they lost to the Riyadh Falcons, who came in this week, and they beat the Paris Gentlemates. And then they also lost to the Carolina Royal Ravens, who beat Toronto this week. So maybe it was that they lost back-to-back game fives last week to teams that are like surprisingly competitive, or people just didn't believe that they were competitive. That could be a part of it as well. I just think there's a lot going on. I don't think this was as simple as FaZe just underperformed, or like that they just didn't show up or anything. FaZe has had these kind of series over the years. They're not flawless by any means, especially with this particular bunch. They lost the Rio to LAT early in the season, and then the next week they beat Toronto and Paris, I believe, or something along those lines. Or they beat Paris later that week, and then they beat Toronto the following week. So like, I really think that maybe we should be taking Minnesota more seriously. Not to say that they'll win a lot of these series, because that's just not how things have been going so far. But I don't think that it'll be just like a 3-0 stomp for them. I think they're going to give these good teams a really hard time, and maybe some series end up like this where they pull off the upset, and we're kind of talking about that really good team and being like, what's going on with them? Like, is there something that we need to kind of diagnose with this competitive team? And I think maybe it's just Minnesota is better than we believed going into this. And then we had not like one of the most baffling results, but certainly one of the most consequential in a really long time. We talked so much about this match over the last week, and I said on the last two or three shows. What was that?
You're skipping one if you're going to the last match.
Oh yeah, I just saw G2 FaZe. Not the most consequential series or anything, but Sunday to start, we had C9 versus Boston. This was interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, Boston is that's the Boston Breach, baby. This is the experience that you should come to know and love after losing to Miami, and definitely a winnable series there. They nearly just get swept in this series against C9, and they just end up winning the series regardless, and like in dominant fashion over the last two maps too. They win 3-2. They reverse sweep C9 after squeaking out a Scar Overload win 4-3, and then they nearly 100-point club C9 and 6-0 them. I don't know how many 6-0s we've had this season. Not very many, and I don't know if any by the Boston Breach, but I think this is really it sums up what Boston can do these two matches this week. What did you think of this reverse sweep?
So this was really the thing that stood out the most to me, and I kind of highlighted it when we were talking about the Boston-Miami match, was Cammy just like turned up in this map 4 when Boston needed it most. 31-13. That's a scoreline that we saw from Cold War Cammy when he was considered one of the top 5 players in the game. That might be his best individual map he's had since that that MVP caliber season. And the next most kills in the game for the map 4 was Snoopy at 21. Nobody else had more than 20. And he just was in takeover mode in that match, and it was definitely something, like, especially again compared to some of the slaying numbers we saw from him in the first series of the week. It was a total flip of the script there, so shout out Cammy. But yeah, the last two maps really were pure dominance, almost 100-point club and 6-0 in the S&D. I did think, another case of nasty just being super solid and consistent. 11 in the S&D, 33 kills in the overload win for Boston. But yeah, I was really, I wasn't expecting a, a reverse sweep here, and especially based on what we had seen previously. Um, but I guess considering Boston got reverse swept by Vancouver, then they do a reverse sweep here. It's kind of like, maybe they should have won the Vancouver series and lost this series, but just a little bit of a flip of the script there. Um, but I do think the other side of this is the fourth Game 5 loss of the season already for Cloud9. They're 1-5 on the season, and earlier this weekend they got 3-0'd by FaZe. That 3-0 and they got 3-0'd there, and they 3-0'd the Surge. Every other series they played this year has been a 3-2 loss.
Yeah, I mean that'll be a roster change coming like that. You just can't lose that many. I mean, I don't know if it'll come like here after major one, but like you just get to a point where you're 1-6 on the season, 1-7, 2-7, and the team, even if they're not really keen on paying a bunch of money, might just be like, well, there's no point to just keep this team and finish 12th in the CDL. Like we might as well try to win a few matches. But this is kind of, I talked about it before. Good teams find a way to win matches, even when they're not playing their best. We saw that with Paris in particular last week against C9, where we were like, what the fuck's going on with Paris? And they still won a Game 5. C9 should have won that match. They should have swept Paris pretty much. But Paris wins, and we look at that and we say, well, that's what a good team will do, is they will be able to find a way to win these matches. C9's not a good team, so they're not able to find a way to win these matches, and they're not playing like the top level talent. Obviously, they played Paris, and they should have won, but they lost Game 5 to Minnesota. They lost Game 5 to Miami, who previous to that had lost Game 5 to OpTic, and Miami has looked very up and down in general. And then to lose to the Boston Breach, which we just talked about, like they are up and down themselves. So like these were very winnable matches. Like this schedule should have been the opportunity for C9 to do what you were saying was possible before the season, whereas they have a strong start to the season because they have a lot of veteran talent, just like Carolina did last season. But you can't lose these coin flip series. You can't lose Game 5s. That you can't go 0-4 in Game 5s and just expect to be any sort of competitive. And that's where we are now. Like they are at the rock bottom of, or they're close to the rock bottom of the CDL. Like they are tied for last, I think now, 1-5 with Vancouver. So technically they're not last because they beat Vancouver, but like. Not great company to keep, I will say, with the Surge. But that's what you expect of this roster, I should say. Like you obviously were saying that they have a chance to have this strong start, but we both said when they picked up this roster, it was like, this roster does not inspire a ton of confidence in general. And we don't think that this is this isn't even resembling a championship contending roster. So this is basically just like, can you get into the winners bracket of majors and can you get to champs? So can you finish 8th? Right now, it does not seem like they really can, even if they're very close to winning a lot of these series.
And I don't even know. I think it is too early. Like the money situation for Cloud9 and this season aside, I don't even know what the roster move would be that could change this team. Now, granted, Exceed joining Carolina, I didn't really think that move was gonna change the move or move the needle that much. And I've been proven wrong so far in the early going of that right now. But I think inarguably Beans has been the most standout player on the C9 team, especially in search with the sniper rifle. If you don't want to say it's been Beans, it's probably Afro, and Afro didn't have the best showing in this Boston series in particular. He went 14-29 in the overload, so 0.5. That you don't see that very often from Afro. But I feel like you wouldn't move Beans, probably don't move Afro unless you're really just willing to move on from that, even though it feels like he probably has the most potential of anybody to break through on this team. And then Mac was already dropped by Cloud9 last year. I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, that happened. He was on
Think
that
so, yeah.
team with Attach, and yeah, because they brought in Capsidal and
Uh, Spart.
Spart. Yeah. I don't know why I just blanked there on that so hard. And then I was gonna say Vivid, like we've already saw just even last year and in past years what happens when you drop Vivid, like your team seemingly doesn't get better. Like whether that's actually a thing or not, it is, you can debate, but yeah, I don't know what the move would be for Cloud9, even if they were to make one, but I guess that's something we'll discuss at a later day.
I mean, it makes sense to keep them at this point just because if you look at their map count, they're 11 and 15. By comparison, Carolina has a 10 and 10 map count record and they're 3 and 2
Yeah.
on the season. So it's like, they've lost a bunch of game fives. Hopefully that kind of luck or whatever can flip as it goes on and you're able to go 50-50 and then you're kind of in the thick of it in terms of either the Major 2 qualifiers or maybe even make a little bit of a loser's bracket run at Major 1. But, again, like if you go 1-6 in the qualifiers and if you don't have a loser's bracket run at Major 1, it's very hard to say, well, they shouldn't make a roster change. It's just the fact of life. Like if you can't win and you're close but you can't win, it just doesn't really matter to a lot of people. It's like, well, you just still lost and there are no moral victories, as some people would like to say. And then, what I was saying earlier is, OpTic versus LAT, the HBR Classic, as we have patented it. I mean, what can you really say about this series? Because this is exactly what you said, where last year it was kind of like OpTic, Kenny, and everybody were on their last leg, and then they played LAT, and there was kind of like okay, maybe we could do something here. Now it feels kind of exactly what that is going on now. Like with LAT, we looked like we were destined for a Kenny benching / release. And then I said, maybe you stick it out until after this match and then see what happens and bring in Niem for the final week. I don't think that's happening. This is the downside of this. This is like sending out your head coach on the hot seat and then he wins a game that he definitely should not win. And then people are like, well, you can't fire him now. This is what we come to expect of the HBR Classic. Just a lot of nonsense. LAT winning this 3-1. Pretty dominant in the middle stretch of this series. 6-1 S&D, 5-1 Overload. Pretty competitive, hard points to an extent. 250 to 216 OpTic win in map 1. Map 4, 250, 213 for LAT. Kenny has a very good series, probably his best series of the season to this point.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if he had a great series against FaZe, but they pull off this win. They had lost 6 straight maps, I think, coming in, and just absolutely got rolled by Paris and Toronto, 2 of the top 5 teams. OpTic is the two-time defending world champions, certainly one of that top 5, and they looked competitive and they beat them. And is there a roster change that you can make at this point, or is it just you're like Major 1 or bust at this point? What do you think?
Roster change for OpTic?
No, I don't want to get to that point yet. I was talking for LAT, but I think, do you think OpTic makes a roster change? This is about the same point that they made last year.
They did even earlier last year. The first
they
time
made like another one at this point.
Yeah, but no, yeah. All jokes aside, I think for sure Kenny is locked in now for at least Major 1, and it would take them just like absolutely flopping at Major 1 to reconsider. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like this is a series like you probably didn't have a ton of expectations going in. Kenny shows up, drops most kills, 100 kills, 1.28 KD, leads the world, leads the server in every stat basically for this series. And now the narrative just completely flips. And I think part of this too is, we only got to see both LAT and OpTic play one match this weekend. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, this was both of their only matches for the weekend. So it's a little bit of, overreacting to one match. But end of the day, yeah, this was, basically what we were kind of joking about last episode just come to reality, in the sense that, LAT hadn't looked good and they basically had nothing to lose in this series. They come out and just maybe had a little extra incentive to try and play well here against the quote unquote top dogs. And they put on a show and took care of business. Outside of Mercury's just like absolutely putting on a masterclass in map one, it was a pretty dominant performance for LAT, especially like you said in the overload and in the search, very one sided. The hard points were, both within 40, 50 points. The overload, I was watching the Scump watch party and they were getting frustrated with the way the ball, they were saying I think it was Methods was like OpTic were just letting the device like sit near their base when LAT would make a push and OpTic would kill them, and instead of OpTic like just picking up the device and trying to run forward with it, they were kind of just leaving it there, and then they would get wiped and LAT could just like push up and get the device from there instead of potentially up more on the map. And I think it was Methods who said it's better if you pick it up and just run forward and die than just leaving it and running forward and dying, because then at least the device is going forward a little bit more. So potentially something to keep an eye on there for both of these teams in overload, whether this was just like a one-off or maybe this is a sign of things to come for both teams in the mode. But I'm more inclined to think this was just like LAT coming out with the fire, potentially OpTic, taking their foot off the gas a little bit. But yeah, I don't even really want to say that because the hard points were pretty close. But yeah, it was just a really strong performance out of Kenny in particular. Scrap played well as well. I mean, everyone really did their part on LAT. I did find it interesting, especially on the map 4. But a lot of map 1 as well. Abizi was using the M15, the AR, a lot more than you probably would have expected. And I think maybe it was just the nature of these maps, or maybe it's, we talked about last episode, he was trying out the Razor in LAT's match. So maybe it's like a comfortability thing for Abizi right now. He hasn't had the best start to this season individually, so maybe he's just trying to find his role with this new team, which gun he can do the most damage with and find his play style with. But that could be an interesting development. Maybe this is something like where LAT start to play on more maps that allow Abizi to play with the AR, and they go with like 3 AR setups and then Hydra is the lone SMG. That would definitely be a pretty big twist and something that I don't think a lot of people would have expected coming into the season. But that's what we always talk about with like the off-season moves and stuff. You can plan your perfect 2-2 split role wise, and then a game drops and the meta just completely doesn't fit your team composition, and then you have to make those adjustments. This could be that first adjustment, and maybe that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on for LAT going forward. I thought Kenny had the post-match interview, and he had some pretty interesting comments talking about just like working on chemistry with the new team. And he even mentioned something about like trying to, hang out more outside of the game and just get acclimated to each other more. So maybe this really has just been a case where we know all the talent that this team has with all the world champions and the accolades and everything like that. And we've all been sitting here wondering like, what the hell is going on with this LAT team? Why aren't they seeing results? And maybe it is just as simple as they need more time to adjust to playing with each other for the first time and getting used to each other in and outside of the map. And it might take some time, or this could just be a one-off upset, and 3 weeks from now we're talking about Kenny being replaced again. Who knows what happens? But at least for now, this one result, especially like I said, I highlighted this was the only match for OpTic and LAT this week. But the way it happened and the final result are definitely they've opened the floodgates, and the reactions are pouring in.
Yeah, let everybody get their hot takes off about either of these teams at this point. I think it's going to be very intriguing to just look back on this match maybe in like 4 to 5 weeks, like by the end of February, and just look back, like, what did this match actually mean? What did this really say about the teams at that point in time? Because we've seen it in the past before, that these matches sometimes are indicative of like what's about to happen or what is happening in these teams. And sometimes it's just like, I don't know, like that was just a bad day for a team or a good day for another team. And it really just didn't factor in much into what was going on. I think that this probably will have some kind of effect or at least show what was going on, because OpTic goes through these like every year. OpTic has won the last 2 world championships, and those have been like incredibly rocky years for the team in general. Like they made roster changes, there have been drama. They have these stretches where it's like, what is going on? How does this uber talented team not win maps or not win matches? So I kind of expect OpTic to go through this every year, even though I always kind of predict like, well, they're going to win this match because they're like way more talented than this other team. But this is OpTic. Like OpTic does this kind of stuff. LAT to an extent also has stretches like that. We saw it whenever Nadeshot was kind of having his meltdown, and then obviously during the end of the season last year, that was like the worst possible time to kind of crater for that team. But that's what happened. So I don't know exactly what this means or what this portends for the foreseeable future, but I have to think that LAT, it doesn't feel like to me, and maybe this is just me being a hater and not being a believer in what this roster is. I don't think this is like LAT's back. LAT is like the top dog or one of the top dogs again. I just think this was an incredibly odd week that we saw.
Yeah.
Toronto lose, Paris lose, FaZe lose, OpTic lose. Like, I'm not like to some extent those teams, or to various extents, I guess, those teams have their issues, and there's something to take away from all of those results. At the same time, I don't know if we can write them off or say that the teams that beat them are top of the line and certainly going to contend for championships. This was a great match for LAT, not a great match for OpTic. I guess we just have to keep like our head on a swivel a little bit and just take it week to week with these teams. And maybe LAT, because they have 2 matches next week against a lot worse competition than they have been playing recently, maybe that's kind of like this was a setup to just absolutely roll against Boston and Carolina. OpTic also plays Carolina. We should also mention that Carolina looks like one of the best teams in the league over the last 2 weeks. So who knows how easy of a match that is for either of those teams. But I'll be interested. I'd really want to look back at this sometime during the Major 2 qualifiers and be like, did this actually mean what we thought it was going to mean at the time? And I mean, regardless, people are going to get their hot takes and their snipes at either one of these teams. But I tend to still believe in OpTic more than LAT, even if that seems ridiculous based on the result of this match.
Yeah, I think 2 quick things on this, and then I think that's pretty much everything. Shout out Brian Stats on Twitter. He mentioned, along with Kenny's stats for this match, Kenny obviously has been on both sides of the OpTic and Thieves matchup. And so he's played in 29 career matches where it's been OpTic versus Thieves, and obviously he's been on both teams. He's now 20-9 in those matches, so basically a 2/3 win percentage. I mean, those are some pretty good teams on both ends of it. So I thought that was pretty noteworthy. And then kind of mentioned it earlier at some point, but I don't remember when. Scump and Methods did the power rankings after the match. It's some new sponsor segment for them on the watch party, and they put OpTic 7th in their power rankings, and I think that's pretty telling in terms of what they think of what they saw today. Now again, I think it is worth mentioning again. Only saw 1 match from OpTic this week. And it's natural to overreact when you only get to see a team play 1 match in a week due to this current format. But the fact the OpTic boys themselves put OpTic in 7th, I thought that was just pretty telling. It was they did phase 1, Gentlemates 2. They went back and forth a bit on 3, 4, 5, but it was I think Falcons, Carolina and Cloy, and they kept going back and forth in the order, and then Thieves 6 and OpTic 7. So I think regardless of what, where you think teams are ranked and whatnot at this point in the season, just the notion that the back-to-back world champs could potentially be the 7th best team according to, those people closely affiliated with that team, this arguably is shaping up to be one of the most competitive seasons ever. And we've always talked about the CDL in recent years as a top 4 or a top 3 or a top 5. Like, potentially going into this event, are there 7 legitimate teams that might be able to win the tournament, or is it just the early makings of people trying to figure out this game? I don't know, but it's definitely at least worth mentioning and thinking about heading into the major.
I think that's a good point, because I'm going to talk about the standings real quick,
Yep.
because it kind of shows you what you're talking about and how there could be 7 teams and maybe even more than that depending on the series, because we saw G2, for example, have a win
Yep.
over FaZe, and they're literally 10th in the CDL at this point. So tied for first place right now are the Falcons, OpTic, and FaZe. They're all 4-2, all 13-10 map count. The tiebreakers obviously would depend, and each of these teams have one more match to play. And then there's also 4 teams that are tied for 4th at 3-2. Toronto, Paris, LAT, and Carolina all are 3-2. All have 2 matches in the final week of the qualifiers, which is really crazy to think about, that those teams could basically rearrange this entire standings. And then you have 2 teams tied for 8th place, which would be the final spot in the winner's bracket at this point, and that's Miami and Boston. Of course, Miami would own the tiebreaker in the if those teams end up tied, because Miami beat Boston. And then 10th is G2 Minnesota, who just beat FaZe. They're 2-4, and then tied for 11th are C9 and Vancouver. Of course, the tiebreaker goes to C9. It doesn't really matter, because both of those teams will not be getting into the winner's bracket. It very well could decide who gets 11 versus 12, and who gets a worse winner or loser's bracket matchup, and who gets a better one, but certainly will not affect the winner's bracket at all. So that shows you that 10 teams are still in play for the winner's bracket for 8 spots, and really anybody of the top 7 is in play for like even the number 1 seed, because you never know with the tiebreakers, because right now like 7 teams could in theory finish 5-2, and like that is kind of crazy to think about going into the final week of the qualifiers.
Yeah, I just think the fact Falcons are technically in first place,
Yeah.
like, you say that a year ago, we're still wondering if Falcons have won a map, or they definitely haven't won a series at this point a year ago. Not sure if they actually had a map win by this point last year, but pretty crazy turnaround. And I think that big win for Falcons early on this week. And a lot of, we've talked about it enough on this podcast. A lot of people were not even really considering Falcons as much of a threat, despite the alleged absurd amount of money being invested into the team and all that stuff. They're in a pretty good position heading into Major 1, but definitely, still time will tell what happens. Got a week more of matches to go. I think the big thing, we'll talk about it more on the preview show, but I have a sneaky suspicion that the first seed tiebreaker isn't going to matter much, just for the simple fact FaZe plays Vancouver, but I'm saying that after just seeing G2 beat FaZe, so who knows? I think Ultimate Chaos is all 3 of those teams at 4-2 win, and they all win by the same score, so all the teams have the same map count, and then we just get absurdity for the seed breakdown, and it'll be chaos.
Yeah, we will see. We will talk about all of the final week matches on our next show, which will likely be Tuesday, or it'll be Tuesday or Wednesday. It always just depends on the schedules. But we will be back at some point in the middle of the week to talk about all those matches, or if any news happens in between. We didn't have any news, surprisingly. Like, we had some challengers drama that we didn't get into, but we're already at an hour and a half, and a lot of it was just people kind of talking shit about each other, which is fun. But if we had a boring week of matches, maybe we would have spent 30 minutes on it. But when you have a week like this, it really it doesn't make sense to spend really any time talking about it. The pick'em so far, you are 21-13. I'm 20-14 on the season. We both went 3-5. Just kind of shows you like we both got like 65% of our matches correct last year, and like we're already like really underperforming, especially these last few weeks. It's just a competitive league. You know, when a league stays at 12 teams for this long, and maybe the game plays a major factor, it's almost impossible to tell. But I mean, that's just kind of what you get. And we got this incredible week of matches. We have one more week of online qualifiers before the first major of the season, which if this is what's happening online, I can only imagine what's going to happen on LAN. But we will talk about it when we get to it. Please like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. I think we hit 275 subscribers on YouTube. So please subscribe if you can. You can also follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. We're very close to getting affiliate status on Twitch. You can also subscribe or follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. You can follow us both on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, in the podcast stores at Ego Chall Podcast. And we will be back at some point in the middle of the week to talk about all the matches and whatever news there is. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Definitely a very exciting and hectic week of matches. Just finished up today over the last 3 days. And I'm looking forward to doing it all again next weekend, leading up to the first LAN event of the Black Ops 7 season. Going to be a banger. Can't wait. Should be plenty for us to talk about, and hope you will join us for all of that to come. But yeah, I got 10 minutes to go live on my Twitch stream to keep my streak going of streaming every day so far this year. So I am gonna quit yapping and go live over there if anybody's bored and wants to tune in. Like Preston said, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. But yeah, appreciate all the support on Ego Chall Podcast 207. Just crazy that we're already over 200 episodes, but hopefully that's just the beginning, more to come. So yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support, and see you on the next one. Remember to send the chow.